This hands-on training includes a full-fledged data lakehouse appliance that you can use as a starting point for your data lakehouse automation projects. The data lakehouse appliance that you will be creating and destroying in this training includes several software-defined systems.
This video will take you through 9 steps, including the following. First, you will create a dev box that you can use to run the Agile Cloud Manager's CLI commands. Second, we will show you how to create an administrative user in AWS that is authorized to create all the resources required for the data lakehouse. Third, you will learn how to create a keys.yaml file that will store the keys that Agile Cloud Manager will use to authenticate to AWS, and you will put that keys.yaml file in the correct location in the dev box. Fourth, you will create a config.yaml file that will store all of the values for variables that make the data lakehouse appliance template reusable. Fifth, we will show you how to confirm that Agile Cloud Manager has been installed. Sixth, you will learn how to run the setup CLI command that installs all the required templates required for Agile Cloud Manager to orchestrate an appliance from your dev box. Seventh, you will practice running some of the CLI commands for creating and destroying high-level components of the appliance. Eighth, we will show you how to run some of the lower-level CLI commands. Ninth, we will explain how to clean up after you are done creating and destroying the example appliance.
Now let's go through each of these steps one at a time.
The first item in this training involves creating a dev box from which you will be able to run the CLI commands that tell the Agile Cloud Manager to create and destroy the data lakehouse appliance and its components. You can set up any Windows or Linux computer to be a dev box for Agile Cloud Manager. We test our software on Windows and Ubuntu servers in our CI/CD release process, but other Linux distributions should work also. Instructions for configuring a dev box are given in a separate article. You can find a link to the article with instructions for creating the dev box if you read the article version of this training in the Marketplace section of agilecloudinstitute.io. For convenience, we are showing the URL of the article version of this training on this slide. But you can also find the article from the Marketplace section of agilecloudinstitute.io. Once you get to the article version of this training in the Marketplace section, keep it open. Then just right-click on the link to the dev box creation training. You will need the written article version of this training when you proceed into the later portions of this training video in several minutes. But for now, examine the DevBox instructions in another browser tab and follow the DevBox instructions to create a DevBox for you to use for the rest of this training. Pause this video until you have created a working DevBox. The rest of this training will assume that you have followed our separate instructions to create a Windows DevBox in an Amazon EC2 instance using the separate training that you can find by clicking through to the DevBox instructions from the link on the screen. You can complete this training with any properly configured DevBox, but our examples in the rest of this video will use the tested example DevBox that we explain how to build using code we provide in the Windows EC2 example. Once you have a properly configured DevBox, you will be ready to proceed with the rest of this training.
After you have a properly configured DevBox, the next step will be to create an administrative user in AWS that has the authorization to perform all of the create and destroy operations that will be required in this training. You will need to cut and paste the exactly typed commands from the written version of this training in the Marketplace section of the Agile Cloud Institute.io website in order to create the administrative user. So keep the written version of this training open in one of your browser tabs. But first use a different browser tab to log into AWS and then set the region to US East 1, North Virginia. Some of the resources defined in the appliance must be in US East 1 region in order to work properly. You can set the region by pointing your mouse to the upper left-hand corner of the AWS GUI console and clicking over the current region. A drop-down menu will appear, and you can find the US East 1, North Virginia region in the drop-down menu. Click on US East 1, North Virginia to select it, and then confirm that it has been selected before you proceed any further. Next, point your mouse to the upper left corner of the AWS GUI console to move focus into the search box. Type Cloud Shell into the search box. A link to the Cloud Shell service will appear in the drop-down search results. Right-click on the Cloud Shell service to open up a Cloud Shell in a different browser tab. Next, navigate to the new Cloud Shell and notice that US East 1 is the designated region. Make sure it is in US East 1. Type the ls-al command to list the contents of the Cloud Shell directory. Confirm that lf-admin-user.yaml is not listed in the directory contents. If lf-admin-user.yaml is listed in the directory contents, then delete it by running an rm command before proceeding. From the written version of this training, copy the wget command, and then paste the wget command into the Cloud Shell and press return to download the lf-admin-user.yaml file. lf-admin-user.yaml is a CloudFormation template that will create an administrative user with the precise permissions required to create the data lakehouse appliance we will create in this training. After the lf-admin-user.yaml CloudFormation template has been downloaded, navigate back to the written version of this training and copy the precise AWS CloudFormation create stack command. Then navigate back to your Cloud Shell tab and paste the precise AWS CloudFormation create stack command, then press the return button to begin running the create stack operation. So go back to the browser tab that has the AWS console main page, then search for the CloudFormation service. Right-click on CloudFormation in the drop-down search results to open up a CloudFormation dashboard in another new browser tab. In the list of stacks, select the admin user stack and wait for it to reach the Create Complete state. Reach the Create Complete state, click on the Outputs tab of the CloudFormation dashboard for the stack. From the list of outputs, right-click on the URL that is listed as the value for the access key ID admin location output variable and open up the link in a new browser tab. In the resulting Secrets Manager page, scroll down to see the Retrieve Secret Value button on the right-hand side of the page. Click on the Retrieve Secret Value button, which will expose the secret value on the left-hand side of the page. Copy this value and paste it into a text file for safekeeping. This is the access key ID for the administrative user. Next, go back to the CloudFormation tab and right-click on the URL that is the value for the secret access key admin location output variable and open up a new browser tab. In the new resulting Secrets Manager page, scroll down to see the Retrieve Secret Value button on the right side of the page. Again, click on the new Retrieve Secret Value button, which will expose the new secret value on the left-hand side of the page. Also copy this value and paste it into a text file for safekeeping. This is the secret access key for the administrative user. Notice that the secret access key is longer and contains a more diverse variety of characters because it is the secret key. Your text file should now have 2 lines. The first line will have the access key ID. The second line will have the secret key. You will need both of these values in the next section when you create the keys.yaml file.
Now we will create the keys.yaml file by using the values that you just collected from the CloudFormation output variables that were produced when you created the administrative user. Begin by going to Section 3 of the written version of this training at the Agile Cloud Institute website and copying the 3 lines of text for the keys.yaml file that are given at the bottom of Section 3. Then open a new empty file in a text editor like Notepad, and paste in the 3 lines that you copied from Section 3 in the written version of this training. Note that the 3rd and 4th lines have placeholder values which you will need to replace with the values that you saved from the CloudFormation output variables. So copy the access key ID into the 2nd line of your new keys.yaml file, replacing the placeholder value. Then copy the secret key value into the 3rd line of your keys.yaml file, again replacing the placeholder value. Carefully check to be sure that you have pasted the correct values. And make sure that the file is valid YAML with exactly 3 lines and with each line containing only a key and a value. The 3 key names should be identical to what you copied from Section 3 of the written version of this training. The first key's value on line 1 should also be the same. But the values for the 2nd and 3rd keys should be what you copied from the CloudFormation output variables. Because this keys.yaml file will be used to identify your automation as the new administrative user that you created in CloudFormation in an earlier step in this training. Then navigate into your dev box. In this video, we are using the Windows EC2 dev box that we explained how to create in the dev box training at agilecloudinstitute.io. The correct location for keys.yaml is given in Section 3 of the written version of this training. Carefully check to make sure you get the correct location. Now that you have the properly formatted 3 lines for keys.yaml, you will need to copy those values into the proper location in your dev box. So in this video, you can see us opening up the RDP client for that EC2 instance so that you can see the Windows desktop of the remote EC2 dev box on the screen. In the dev box, we first open up Windows File Explorer and navigate to the correct directory for the keys.yaml so that you can see that the directory is empty before we start. The user for this example dev box happens to be administrator, so we navigate to the C administrator ACM keys starter directory and see that it is empty to start. Then open up Notepad in the remote dev box and paste in the contents of keys.yaml that you created in the preceding step. If you have trouble cutting and pasting between your host computer and the remote dev box, you might have to try a few times before the pasting works. But make sure that you have the proper 3-line format when you are done pasting the 3 lines of content. Then save the file as type all files with the name keys.yaml in the C administrator ACM keys starter directory. When you navigate back to Windows File Explorer, you can see that the correct directory now has your keys.yaml in it.
Next, you will need to create a config.yaml file in the same directory. The process will be very similar. In Section 4 of the written version of this training, you can find the exact text that you will need to put into your config.yaml file. Copy the entire text of the config.yaml into the Windows clipboard from the written portion of this training. You can see an example of us copying it in the video. Also note that the correct block of text is formatted as code on the web page to make it easier to distinguish. The config.yaml is a very simple YAML document that is nothing more than a list of key value pairs. But you do need to preserve its precise contents and formatting in order for it to work properly. Once you have copied the contents of config.yaml into the clipboard of your local computer, navigate back to the RDP client to see the remote dev box. You can see that Windows File Explorer is still open to the C administrator ACM keys starter directory and that there is no config.yaml file yet. Open Notepad in the remote dev box again. In a new empty file in Notepad, paste in the contents of config.yaml that you carefully copy from the written portion of this training. Then save the file on the dev box as type all files with the name config.yaml in the same correct directory. You can see in the video that we hovered the mouse pointer over the path in the Notepad Save dialog box to confirm that we are saving config.yaml to the correct directory. After you have saved config.yaml, double-check in Windows File Explorer to confirm that there is now a new config.yaml next to your keys.yaml in the correct C administrator ACM keys starter directory before you continue.
Next, you will need to confirm that Agile Cloud Manager has been properly installed on the dev box. The command is very simple. You can copy the ACM version command from Section 5 of the written portion of this training. Or you can simply remember to type ACM version in the command line. When you navigate back into the dev box, open up Windows File Explorer again. But this time navigate to the root of the C drive and create a new empty directory into which you will have the Agile Cloud Manager download required resources during the setup process. Then run the dir command to confirm that the correct directory is empty. In the command line, use the cd command to navigate the command prompt to the new empty working directory that you created in Windows File Explorer. Then open Windows CMD to run the command. In theory, you could alternatively do this in PowerShell. But we are doing this in Windows CMD to point out that this does not depend on PowerShell, and that you should be able to run these commands in any Windows or Linux shell. Open up your new directory in Windows File Explorer after you create it so that you can see it is empty. And keep it open so that you can see when things will be added to it. You could create the new empty working directory anywhere in your file structure. But we are creating the directory in the root of the C drive for this training because that is an easy-to-find location. Then type the acm version command to confirm that Agile Cloud Manager is installed.
Now that you have confirmed that your dev box has the proper keys and config files, and that the acm version command works properly, the next step will be to run the acm setup command for this particular appliance. You can find the correct setup command in section 6 of the written version of this training. You can see in the video here that we are selecting the entire one single line of acm setup on command with the correct value for the source repo argument. Note that the source repo argument tells the Agile Cloud Manager where to find the definition of the appliance that we will be orchestrating in this training. Then navigate back to the dev box and set up your screen as you see in the video. Keep Windows CMD open on one side of the screen, and open up Windows File Explorer on the other side of the screen with the working directory you created open so that you can see that the working directory is empty before you begin running the setup command. Then paste the setup command into the command line. Take a moment to confirm that you have the exact syntax for the command that is given in the written training. Press the return button to run the setup command. You can see the progress of the command both in the command line's printout and also in the working directory in Windows File Explorer. First, a working directory will be created called acm admin. You will be able to look inside the acm admin directory later to find things like parameter files that the Agile Cloud Manager will use when running CLI commands to orchestrate cloud resources on your behalf. And then you will see the appliance repositories directory name changed to acm config. The reason it is renamed acm config is so that any appliance configuration will always be in the same named location, regardless of which appliance you are orchestrating. Other repositories will also be downloaded into subdirectories of your working directory. You can see the list of things that are downloaded and where they originated from if you go into the acm config directory and open up the setupconfig.yaml file. There is documentation in the engineering section of Agile Cloud Institute (IO) that describes setupconfig.yaml in detail. But it is always easiest to start with a working example. And for now, you can simply know that setupconfig.yaml in the acm config file is where you can look to begin exploring the appliance you have been using in this training. Also note that the setup command can work just as easily with private repositories as for public repositories. We are using public repositories for this training. You can learn how to use it with private repositories in the documentation in the engineering section of the Agile Cloud Institute (IO) website.
Step 7 in this training is to run the CLI commands that will orchestrate the data lakehouse appliance. You can do the higher level commands here in Step 7. Then you can try out the lower level commands in Step 8. Let's examine what the commands are on this slide before you actually run commands. So just watch and listen for a few minutes while we are still on this slide. Before we get to the one-line acm appliance on command, let's start with two sequences of commands that are just one level lower. We are starting one level lower to make it easier for you to learn what is happening when Agile Cloud Manager runs. You can start with an on sequence that turns on the highest levels of each system in the appliance, one at a time. The off sequence progresses through the systems in reverse order. And then within each system, the off sequence first destroys the services of the system and then destroys the foundation of the system. You can see on this slide that the off sequence is in reverse order compared to the on sequence. There are 6 commands in this particular off sequence. After you have run the on sequence of commands, you will need to run the off sequence of commands. For now, just notice that the sequence of on commands turns on 6 things, and that it turns those things on in a very specific order. You can see on the screen that, for this appliance, the on sequence progresses through each system in order, and turns on the foundation for the system before turning on the services in the system. Some systems will have foundations, while other systems will not have foundations. You can learn more about what the optional foundation can be in our other training at agilecloudinstitute.io. Before you actually run any of these commands, let's also review the highest level that lets you create the entire appliance in one command by running ACM appliance on. And then the CLI also lets you delete the entire appliance in one command by running ACM appliance off. You can find all of these commands in Step 7 of the written version of this training at agilecloudinstitute.io. Let's begin by copying the first command, which is ACM Foundation on for the Lakehouse core system, which you can see in the video. Then navigate back into the dev box and notice that you still have the command line pointed to the same working directory from a previous step. Right-click to paste the ACM Foundation on command into the command line. Then check to make sure you got the syntax exactly as it was on the training website. Then press the return key to begin running the command. Many things are done under the hood of the Agile Cloud Manager when you run each CLI command. You can read about what happens in the engineering section of agilecloudinstitute.io. The part of the documentation that explains logging is particularly relevant here. The Agile Cloud Manager creates a workflow based on the structure of your system configuration files. The logs in the console print out the current status of each step in its workflow every time the workflow reaches a new step. This enables you to know exactly where in the workflow the Agile Cloud Manager is at any given point in the console output or in the logs. Then, between each workflow step status printout, the Agile Cloud Manager prints out the shell response from each of the many commands it runs to orchestrate cloud systems. The structure of the logs and of the console printout is very easy to understand. But you will have to invest a little time practicing with it while reading the documentation about logging in the engineering section of agilecloudinstitute.io. That is why we are starting by having you run small commands at first. To make it easier for you to understand what is happening before you run larger commands that will output more verbose logs about more complex processes. You should also examine the CloudFormation dashboard for the North Virginia region while you run these commands. The CloudFormation dashboard will show you the AWS level of the work that is being done. If you carefully compare the command line output with the AWS CloudFormation dashboard output, you will see that the Agile Cloud Manager runs a separate long-running script after the CloudFormation template is finished running. You can find that same script in the preprocessor section of the system template if you examine the source code. The point here at this level is that the Agile Cloud Manager does other things besides just running templates. You can run all 6 of the on commands in order as described in the written version of the training. You can examine the output of each of the commands and compare that output to the underlying templates to really understand what is happening. That will take some time and is worth your effort because you will learn how to use this powerful tool. But for now, in this video, we will run the ACM Foundation off command so that beginners can have some experience creating and destroying with this powerful tool with a minimal time investment. You can copy the ACM Foundation off command from the written version of this training and paste it into the command line of the dev box. Then carefully check to see that you copied the exact syntax. Then press return to run the off command. Agile Cloud Manager will again run a script before it destroys the CloudFormation stack, so there may be a delay after you start the command and before the AWS CloudFormation dashboard displays delete in progress as the status of the stack. You can monitor the command line output side by side with the AWS CloudFormation dashboard to see what is happening as the destroy process goes through its steps. Sometimes Agile Cloud Manager runs scripts and does other things during periods of time in which CloudFormation will have nothing going on. So you need to monitor both the command line output and also the CloudFormation dashboard. However, sometimes the command line will get stuck due to your changing focus between applications, such as when you examine the CloudFormation dashboards or when you go to read something on a website. A quick fix if the command line gets stuck is to first return focus to the command line by clicking your mouse on it, and then to very gently press the return key one time for a normal, short length of time. A gentle, short pressing of the return key can bring the command line's output back up to date. If the command line still looks stuck after that, then wait perhaps a minute and try another single gentle pressing of the return key after you give focus back to the command line. When the command line shows that it has completed its run, you will have destroyed the foundation that you created. Congratulations! You successfully created and destroyed data lake resources with the Agile Cloud Manager. Now is also a great time for you to examine the documentation for the logs that get created by Agile Cloud Manager. If your commands all ran successfully, then you have achieved the expected response. So that reading about the logs will just help you better understand the tool. But if you encountered any errors, the log documentation will enable you to read the logs to understand exactly where in the process the problem occurred, so that you can diagnose the root cause of any problem. Your dev box could have had a connectivity issue. AWS could have had a temporary service outage. You might have had a typo in your keys.yaml or in your config.yaml. You could have a typo in your CLI command. The logs will tell you where any problem might have occurred. If you confirm that your syntax is correct, then the best course of action is to run the Agile Cloud Manager's CLI command another time. Repeating the same Agile Cloud Manager CLI command a second time will resolve almost all problems. Also note that the logs will be destroyed when you destroy the dev box. This is by design for training purposes. If you start using this in a formal development process, you can alter the DevBox CloudFormation template so that the logs get written to a persistent file share that will remain accessible each time a DevBox is destroyed.
After you have successfully run some of the higher-level commands, you can also experiment with some of the lower-level commands. Agile Cloud Manager's command line interface enables you to operate on many levels of an appliance. Lower-level commands allow you to do things like create, update, or destroy individual instances of specific types of services, or to operate on only the services of one specific type in one specific system. You can read about the lower-level commands if you navigate to Section 8 of the written version of this training, and if you right-click on the link to the Command Line Interfaces documentation in the Engineering section of Agile Cloud Institute.io. When the Command Line Interfaces documentation page opens up, you will see a list of a dozen commands, some of which you have run, and others of which you have not yet run. After you have read the Command Line Interfaces engineering documentation, you can go back to Section 8 of the written version of this training and click on the link to architectural documentation of the language that defines the objects on which the CLI commands operate. When you open that link in another tab on your web browser, you will see a short video in addition to short documentation. The short video is part 8 of a larger series about how to architect an Agile enterprise using Agile Cloud Manager. When you are done with that, you can return to Step 8 of the written version of this training and right-click on the next link to open another new browser tab containing architectural documentation about how to operate on the object model using the command line interface. You will see another short video which is part 9 of our series on how to architect an Agile enterprise using Agile Cloud Manager. After you have invested a little time learning about the lower-level CLI commands, you will be ready to move on to the last step of this training.
The last part of this training involves cleaning up after the work you just did. Make sure that any CloudFormation stacks have been destroyed by examining the CloudFormation dashboard in the AWS console. One thing you can do is to remove the keys.yaml and config.yaml files you created so that they go into a safe place and do not remain in the dev box. You might need the keys.yaml and config.yaml again, so you can keep them. Just make sure that you keep them securely. You also created logs that will be destroyed when the dev box is destroyed. So if you need to retain copies of the logs, back them up. And if you will continually need to persist copies of the logs, then you should examine your DevBox build process and create a way to use persistent storage for the logs in a file share that is mapped to the log location that Agile Cloud Manager uses in the local file system. After you are done cleaning up, you can either delete the DevBox or retain it. If you are using the CloudFormation EC2 DevBox that we have been demonstrating within this training, you can either leave it running by keeping the stack alive, or you can destroy it by deleting the stack in the CloudFormation dashboard and then recreating a new DevBox each time. Congratulations on completing this training. If you need technical support, training, or consulting related to these topics, feel free to reach out to us directly. You can also connect with the architect on LinkedIn to discuss Agile Cloud Manager directly with the architect and to receive invitations to online training events.
You can download the Agile Cloud Manager for free at agilecloudinstitute.io and you can hire the Agile Cloud Institute to perform technical support, training, and consulting. You can get more information and you can contact us through agilecloudinstitute.io.